A loyal German shepherd was wandering through the snow with a little girl when he suddenly stopped, his ears twitching toward a half-buried police car in the forest. But the moment they pulled open the half-ajar trunk, the child froze, speechless. Inside lay a bound, blindfolded officer, barely breathing, with the freezing wind biting at his skin. He had been ambushed, left for dead, and no one was looking for him. Yet this dog had found him. Why had he been abandoned like this? What deadly secret was he carrying that someone would go this far to silence him? And how could a little girl and her dog possibly protect the evidence that could take down a powerful man? What happened next will make you believe in loyalty, courage, and miracles. Snowpine, Montana, lay braced against the storm. The sky hung like dull steel, the air sharp enough to bite, and the wind whipped across the valley in long, cold howls. Snow spun sideways in stinging flurries, finding every gap in a coat or fence, settling heavily on rooftops and roads alike. At the Parker farmhouse, snow had already climbed high against the porch steps. Margaret Parker, 68, stood at the front window in a thick wool shawl, her silver hair wound into a tidy bun. She had seen many winters here, but storms like this always tightened her chest. Since losing her only son in a logging accident years ago, she carried an instinctive fear of the unexpected, a fear that always sharpened when someone she loved was out in weather like this. Beside her, Harold Parker, 70, tall and wiry, adjusted the battered radio for a weather update. His calm demeanor rarely cracked, but tonight his brows were drawn together. "She should have been home by now," Margaret said, her voice taut. "She took the deer path," Harold replied. "Quicker, and she's got Ranger." Margaret nodded, but her gaze didn't leave the swirling white beyond the glass. Out in the storm, Emily, Parker 10 years old, small for her age but agile, walked briskly along the narrowing deer path. Her teal parka was zipped tight, and her strawberry blonde hair peeked from under a knitted hat. She held a worn leather leash clipped to Ranger, the Parker family's 5-year-old German shepherd. Ranger's sable and black coat rippled as he moved, his amber eyes sharp and restless. Once trained as a K-9, he had spent months working under Officer Luke Carter before a training injury ended his service career. The Parkers took him in, but Luke had visited from time to time, calling him partner and scratching that spot behind his ears that only he seemed to know about. The snow muted most sounds, but not to Ranger. Today, something on the wind made him stop dead. His ears twitched forward, nostrils flaring wide. He took a few deliberate sniffs, then pulled sharply left, off the path. Emily stumbled, startled by the sudden change. "What is it, boy?" she asked, but Ranger didn't look back. His whole body leaned into the leash, urgent, insistent. Trusting him, Emily followed, boots sinking deep into untouched snow. The trees closed in, muffling the storm, until a shape emerged ahead, a police cruiser, half buried in drifts, the Montana State Police insignia faint beneath frost. Ranger's pace quickened. He circled the vehicle once, nose brushing along the seams, until he stopped abruptly at the trunk. The lid wasn't shut, it hung open by an inch, a black sliver against the white. From that gap came a faint sound. It wasn't the wind. It was rhythmic, uneven, like someone breathing hard through their nose, muffled and trapped. Ranger's body stiffened. His ears locked forward, tail dropping slightly in focus. Then he gave a sharp, commanding bark, the kind he'd used during search drills with Luke. He jumped, front paws landing on the bumper, claws scraping the frozen metal as he thrust his nose toward the opening. Emily's heart hammered. She brushed away snow caked on the lid, her mittens clumsy against the ice. The trunk groaned as she lifted it. A rush of cold air escaped, and with it, the sight froze her in place. Curled awkwardly inside was Officer Luke Carter. His head was tilted against the metal wall, dark brown hair damp and stuck to his forehead. A strip of duct tape covered his mouth, pressed so tightly that frost had formed along its edges. A black cloth blindfold cut across his eyes, the fabric stiff from the cold. His wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope, digging deep into pale skin rubbed raw. His breathing was shallow, each exhale fogging faintly in the icy air. For a long moment, Emily didn't move. Her mind catalogued everything at once, the way his fingers twitched weakly, the purplish tinge to his lips, the tremor in his shoulders. He looked like a man caught between waking and collapse. Ranger stepped closer, his nose hovering just above Luke's face. He sniffed once, twice, then let out a low, guttural whine that Emily had never heard from him before, an unmistakable sound of recognition and worry. His tail didn't wag. Instead, he stayed locked in place, watching Luke like he might vanish if he blinked. The wind sighed through the trees overhead, but Emily barely heard it. Her eyes met Ranger's for an instant, and she knew. This wasn't just any stranger in trouble. This was his person from another life, someone who had once been on the other end of the leash. Emily's breath fogged the cold air as she whispered, "Luke." The snow fell harder, each flake thick and slow, settling over the scene as if trying to hide it from the world. The forest stood still, holding its breath as girl and dog stared down into the trunk at the man the storm had tried to keep for itself. Emily's hands were already numb, but she forced them to move. The wind howled through the treetops, shaking loose small avalanches of snow that tumbled from the pines and landed with muffled thumps. Inside the half-open trunk, Officer Luke Carter was barely moving, his shallow breaths a faint fog in the frigid air. She swallowed hard and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the small folding knife her grandfather insisted she carry for rope, apples, and emergencies you don't see coming. Ranger stayed close, his muscular frame tense. His ears swiveled constantly, reading the forest's invisible language. He was still standing with his front paws braced against the bumper, amber eyes fixed on Luke. Emily climbed onto the snow-packed bumper for leverage. "It's okay. We're going to help you," she whispered, unsure if Luke could even hear her. She slipped the blade under the rope binding his ankles. The fibers were frozen stiff, biting into her fingertips even through the knife's handle. It took 3 awkward sawing motions before the rope gave way. Luke flinched at the sudden slack but didn't speak. Ranger, as if on cue, moved toward Luke's bound wrists. He lowered his head, teeth working carefully at the knot, the way he'd once been trained to retrieve without crushing. The icy fibers resisted, but Ranger was patient. He tugged, shifted his grip, tugged again until one loop slipped free. Luke managed to wriggle his hands enough to pull the knot loose himself. With trembling fingers, he reached up and tore away the black blindfold. Hazel eyes blinked rapidly, adjusting to the dim light and the snow-bright forest beyond. His gaze swept from Emily to Ranger, recognition flickering. He reached for the duct tape over his mouth, ripping it off with a grunt that turned into a cough. His voice, when it came, was raw. "Ranger. Emily. Thank God." Emily stepped back slightly, giving him room. "You know, Ranger?" Luke nodded once, his breath visible in the cold. "We worked together, a while ago, before—" He coughed again, swallowing hard. "Before he was retired." Ranger gave a single wag of his tail, then resumed scanning the tree line. Luke shifted, trying to sit up. His uniform was dusted with frost, the Montana State Police badge dulled by ice. "Listen, we don't have much time," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Before they caught me, I hid something a bag. Evidence. Near the old stone marker in the North Woods." Emily frowned. "Why didn't you just bring it with you?" "They were already on my tail," Luke replied. "Had to hide it before they searched me. If they find it first, everything's gone." A fresh gust of wind hissed through the trees, rattling a bare branch against the cruiser's roof. Ranger turned his head sharply toward the sound, his body language tightening. Emily noticed the fur along his spine rise. Luke's hazel eyes flicked to the dog. "He hears something." Before Emily could respond, the scene shifted. Miles away, in the warm confines of the Snow Pine Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Dalton Briggs stood in his office, a man in his mid-50s with a thick frame and a neatly trimmed salt-and-pepper beard. His uniform was pressed to perfection, badge polished, the image of small-town authority. His reputation in public was that of a steady, no-nonsense leader. But those who had crossed him or gotten too close to his real dealings knew better. He held a steaming mug of coffee, glancing toward the frost-laced window. "Any word on Carter?" he asked, his tone casual. Deputy Mark Ellis, a young man in his late 20s with a sharp jawline and an eagerness to please, shook his head. "Search teams haven't turned up anything yet, sir," Dalton grunted, setting the mug down. "Then we wait. No point sending more men out in this weather. Dangerous." His eyes, a calculating steel gray, lingered on the map pinned to the wall, his fingers tapping absently near the forest trails. "If he's out there, the cold will do the work for us." Ellis hesitated, glancing toward the door. "You want me to keep the radio clear of updates?" Dalton smiled faintly. "You catch on quick." Back in the forest, Luke braced against the trunk's edge, pushing himself upright. Emily steadied him instinctively, her small frame surprisingly steady under his weight. "You can walk?" she asked. "For now," Luke replied, teeth chattering. "But we need to find that evidence before they realize I'm still breathing." Ranger dropped from the bumper to the snow, standing close to Luke's side like a shield. His breath came in short, misty bursts, but his focus was fixed on the trees ahead. Emily closed the knife and stuffed it back into her pocket. She looked at the man she'd only known from passing glimpses in town and now found sitting half-frozen in a car trunk. "Where's the stone marker?" "North Woods," Luke said, nodding in that direction. 2 miles, maybe less, if the drifts aren't bad. Emily tightened her grip on Ranger's leash, though she suspected she wouldn't need it. The dog was already facing north, his posture saying he'd heard every word. They turned away from the cruiser, snow swallowing their footprints almost as fast as they made them. The forest around them seemed to watch in silence, the only sound the crunch of boots and the occasional rustle of Ranger's paws breaking the crust of ice. And the storm wasn't easing, and Luke's shivers were worsening. But Emily could feel the urgency in his steps. The way his words had carried more than fear, there had been a weight there, the kind people have when they know too much. And, beside her, Ranger's every move said the same thing. This wasn't just about getting home. This was about finishing something that had already nearly cost Luke his life. The snowstorm had not relented. It came down in thick, swirling sheets that bit at the skin and stung the eyes. The world was white and muted, except for the crunch of boots and the rhythmic puff of Ranger's breath as he led the way. Luke Carter moved with difficulty, still recovering from the hours spent bound in the cold. His police jacket, now zipped up tight, hung heavily with moisture. His face, sharp-jawed with days of unshaven stubble, was pale, his lips tinged with blue. But there was a fire in his eyes, the same one that had carried him through years of dangerous work. Emily Parker walked close beside him, her wool hat pulled low over her forehead, scarf wrapped so tight that only her eyes were visible. She was small against the storm, but there was a stubborn tilt to her chin. And just ahead of them, Ranger, 5 years old. A large sable and black German shepherd moved with the deliberate confidence of a creature that knew his purpose. They were heading toward the old boundary marker in the northern woods. Luke had hidden the case files there before the ambush, a waterproof duffel containing the only hard evidence tying Sheriff Dalton Briggs to a money laundering network that reached far beyond Snowpine. The marker wasn't much, just a chest-high column of stone left over from old survey work decades ago, but Luke had chosen it because almost no one came this far in winter. As they trudged forward, Luke's voice was hoarse but steady. "Ranger knows the scent. He was with me when I hit it." Emily glanced at him, a question in her eyes, but she didn't ask. She'd already noticed how Ranger seemed to respond to Luke with something deeper than ordinary obedience recognition. Ranger suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward. He lowered his nose, sniffing along the snow until his paws found a spot where the wind-carried drifts were thinner. Then, with a low whine, he began digging. Snow flew in quick bursts from his strong forelegs, his dark coat standing out stark against the white. Luke and Emily knelt beside him. Within moments, the corner of a black duffel appeared, half frozen, under the packed snow. Luke brushed off the ice, fingers numbed but sure. The zipper gave way reluctantly, and inside lay the sealed evidence bags, documents, and a small encrypted flash drive. Everything was intact. Luke let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. This is what they tried to kill me for. Far away, in the warmth of her small apartment above the Snowpine Gazette office, Ana Morales sat hunched over her desk. 35 years old, Latina heritage, with shoulder-length dark hair and a habit of drumming her fingers when deep in thought, Ana was a reporter who had seen too many cover-ups. Her father had been a patrol officer killed under unclear circumstances when she was 16. A wound that had never fully healed and had made her allergic to corruption in uniform. Her phone buzzed. A text message appeared from an unknown number. Luke is alive, in danger. Don't trust anyone at the station. Ana froze. Luke had been her partner during her short stint in the department before she left for journalism. He was one of the few she trusted completely. Without hesitating, she began packing her camera, notepad, and recorder. The winter storm outside didn't matter. If Luke was in trouble, she was going to help. Back in the forest, Luke secured the duffel over his shoulder. Ranger trotted in a slow circle, scanning the tree line, nose twitching against the wind. The dog's instincts were alive with warnings, nothing concrete yet, but something was out there. Emily adjusted her gloves and looked at Luke. What now? Luke's jaw tightened. We get this to someone who can't be bought, and we do it before Briggs realizes I'm still breathing. Ranger gave a single, sharp bark, as if to say he agreed. Then he stepped ahead, breaking trail again, each paw print marking a path through the endless white. The wind had shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine resin and something Ranger recognized before any human could. The German shepherd slowed, ears angling forward, nose twitching in short, deliberate sniffs. His paw prints cut a clean path through the powder, but now he stopped, head low, eyes locked on the ground ahead. Luke Carter caught up to him, duffel of case files slung across his shoulder, the strain of the storm etched into the lines of his face. Emily Parker stumbled slightly in the snow behind him, her breath forming little clouds in the frigid air. "What is it, boy?" Luke asked, stepping closer. Ranger's paw pressed into an indentation in the snow, a boot print, crisp and deep, too fresh to be from anyone earlier that day. Luke crouched down, brushing away the thin veil of drift to reveal more. The pattern on the sole was unmistakable. Tactical boots. And not just any pair, he recognized the scuffed heel and the worn left tread. "Cole Maddox," Luke muttered under his breath. Emily's eyes widened. "Who's that?" Luke's gaze hardened. One of Briggs's enforcers, ex-deputy. Got kicked out for excessive force. But Briggs kept him close for the dirty jobs. Luke looked back at the trail. The prints were leading straight toward their route back to town. Emily instinctively drew closer to Luke, her gloved hands clutching the hem of his jacket. "Is he coming for us?" Luke's voice was low, steady. "If he's here, he already knows too much." Ranger gave a sharp bark, breaking the tension, and then turned to the right, toward a narrow game trail that snaked deeper into the woods. His tail was stiff, his body angled forward with that sure-footed urgency of a dog on a mission. Luke didn't hesitate. "We follow him. He'll take us the long way." The path was barely visible under the snow, but it wound through a thicket of spruce and aspen, their trunks forming a shield from open sight. Ranger trotted ahead, checking the air every few steps, his breath steaming in the cold. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, the sound of the wind muffled by the dense trees. Far from the snow and silence in her cramped office at the Snowpine Gazette, Ana Morales sat with her laptop open, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold beside her. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her dark eyes darted over spreadsheets and PDF scans. The bank statements she'd been sent copies of internal ledgers were damning. Transactions in amounts just under reporting limits. Transfers to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. And here, she paused, her pulse quickening. Several of the account numbers matched exactly with the list Luke had texted her hours earlier. Anna leaned back in her chair, letting the realization sink in. The evidence wasn't just solid, it was explosive. Briggs had been moving dirty money for years, laundering it through county contracts and fake charities. But what struck her most was the sheer boldness of it. He hadn't even tried to hide some of the connections, as if he believed no one would ever dare look. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an unknown number, it was her contact in Helena, a federal investigator named Mark Ainsley. He was in his early 40s, lean, with a clean-shaven jaw and a reputation for being methodical to the point of obsession. His text was short. "Keep that file safe. And Anna, watch your back." Back in the forest, Luke's group pressed on, the cold gnawing at their faces and fingers. Emily tried to keep her mind off the fear by counting her steps, but every so often she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see a dark figure breaking through the snow after them. Ranger suddenly veered left, stopping at a low ridge where the snow was thinner. Luke climbed up beside him and looked down below them. About 50 yards away was the main trail they'd been on earlier. And there, just visible through the swirling snow, was Cole Maddox. He was a large man, in his late 30s, built like a linebacker with broad shoulders that made his dark winter coat strain at the seams. His head was shaved close, a thin scar cutting down from his temple to his jaw. Maddox walked with a slow, deliberate pace, scanning the tree line as if he knew they were watching. Luke pulled Emily gently down behind the ridge. "We keep moving. He's hunting, and we're not giving him the chance to find us." Ranger led again, this time keeping to uneven ground, crossing frozen creeks and weaving between clusters of fallen logs. Every choice he made kept them shielded from open sight and, more importantly, downwind from Maddox. The snow began to fall harder, cloaking the forest in a thicker curtain of white. With every step, their footprints grew fainter behind them. Emily felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could lose him completely. But Luke knew better. Maddox was relentless. If they made it to town, it wouldn't be the end. It would only be the beginning. For now, though, they had one advantage. Ranger. By the time the Parker farmhouse came into view, the snow was falling so thick it blurred the edges of the world. Emily half-dragged, half-supported Luke up the porch steps, her cheeks flushed from the cold, hair damp and tangled beneath her knit hat. The wind howled against the clapboard siding, rattling the shutters. Inside, warmth enveloped them, the kind of dry heat that smelled faintly of burning cedar from the fireplace. Sarah Parker, Emily's mother, emerged from the kitchen. She was in her late 40s, tall and willowy, with silver streaks running through her chestnut hair and a kind face worn by years of rural living. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her brown eyes widened when she saw the man leaning heavily on her daughter. "Good Lord, Emily," she breathed, rushing over. "Who?" "This is Luke Carter," Emily said quickly, kicking off her boots. "He's a friend. And he's hurt." Sarah didn't ask more, not yet. She wrapped a thick wool blanket around Luke's shoulders and guided him to the couch near the fire. Her movements were brisk, but gentle, the practiced efficiency of someone used to caring for the sick and injured. Luke eased down, his breathing still ragged from the trek. Ranger came in behind them, snow clinging to his sable and black coat, amber eyes alert even in the comfort of the room. He shook off, sending a spray of melting ice across the floor. Emily was already pulling out her phone. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from urgency, as she scrolled to Anna's contact. She pressed the call button. Anna Morales answered on the first ring. "Emily?" Her voice was sharp, the kind that cut through noise. "It's not just me," Emily said, glancing at Luke. "Luke's here. He's alive. He has the files." There was a pause on the other end, then a low exhale. "Put him on." Luke took the phone, his voice hoarse. "Anna, I've got confirmation. Briggs's money trail, front to back. I'm at the Parker place, off County Road 12, but we've been followed." He rattled off coordinates, his eyes narrowing as if picturing the maps in his head. As he spoke, Ranger's head lifted. The dog's ears pricked, nose twitching toward the door. A low growl built in his throat, deep and steady. Emily noticed first, her gaze snapping to him. "Ranger?" The sound of it, pure warning made Luke's hand tighten around the phone. Ranger padded toward the front window, his body tense. A split second later, faint but distinct, came the crunch of footsteps on snow. Not the hesitant, uneven pace of a neighbor, but steady, deliberate strides. And then, sharp in the cold air, the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder drifted through the cracks in the frame. Luke was already moving, his instincts snapping back into gear. "Anna, we've got company." Anna's voice sharpened. "Then listen carefully. Stay inside, don't engage unless you have to." As soon as the call ended, Anna swiveled in her chair at the Gazette office, snatching up a second phone. Her fingers flew over the keypad as she called Mark Ainsley, the federal agent who had once been pulled off a case after getting too close to Dalton Briggs. Mark answered with a terse, "Talk." "It's happening," Anna said. "Luke's alive and he's got the evidence. Briggs' people are already on him at the Parker farmhouse." There was no hesitation in Mark's reply. "Hold your line. I'll coordinate with Helena field office. We'll send a unit. Keep your phone on." Back at the farmhouse, Sarah had quietly stepped to the hallway closet and returned with an old 20-gauge shotgun. She wasn't a woman who frightened easily. Life on the outskirts of Snowpine had taught her to be self-reliant. Still, her hands weren't steady as she checked the chamber. Emily moved to the curtains, peeking through a sliver. The whiteness outside was thick, swirling. But between gusts, she caught glimpses, shadows moving beyond the fence line. Luke crouched beside Ranger, his hand resting on the dog's shoulder. "Stay with me, boy. If they make a move, I need your eyes and ears." Ranger gave a short huff, tail low but steady, muscles coiled like a spring. The sounds outside grew clearer, the faint, metallic click of a weapon being readied, the soft murmur of voices carried on the wind. Luke's mind worked fast. "We need to keep them from getting close enough to see through the windows. Emily, lights off in the front rooms." Within moments, the front half of the house was in shadow, the glow of the fireplace now hidden by the tall back of the couch. They moved quietly, aware that any sound might carry in the still air outside. And then, as if on cue, the snow began to fall harder, thick, wet flakes that clung to every surface. The storm was turning in their favor. Luke leaned close to Sarah. "If we can buy 15 minutes, backup will be here." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. Emily reached for Ranger's collar, steadying herself by his presence. Outside, the shadows shifted, but they didn't approach, not yet. The standoff had begun. The farmhouse had gone silent, the only sound the steady hiss of snow against the windows. The front rooms lay in darkness, shadows stretching long across the wooden floor. Luke crouched behind the kitchen counter with Emily and Ranger. His service pistol rested in his grip, finger hovering near the trigger guard, his breath measured. Emily's eyes were wide, her back pressed against the cabinet door, the faint tremor in her hands betraying nerves she tried to hide. Ranger, crouched low beside them, was a taut coil of muscle and instinct. His sable and black coat bristled, amber eyes locked toward the rear of the house. The faint growl rumbling in his chest was like distant thunder. From somewhere outside, the snow crunched under a single, deliberate step, then another. Luke motioned to Emily with 2 fingers, "Stay here." He adjusted his position to get a better line toward the back hallway. Sarah was in the living room, out of sight but close enough to hear. She had the shotgun resting across her knees, her jaw set with the quiet determination of someone who had faced hardship before and refused to bow to it. A faint metallic rattle came from the mudroom door. Luke's eyes narrowed. The sound was followed by the squeak of hinges. The back door inched open, letting in a knife of frigid wind. And then movement. A tall figure in a dark parka stepped inside, the snow still clinging to his shoulders. His boots left wet prints across the floorboards. His face was hidden behind a black ski mask, but his stance radiated aggression. Before Luke could rise, Ranger exploded forward with a sudden, guttural bark. The canine's charge was a blur pause pounding, teeth bared. The intruder froze mid-step, startled by the wall of snarling fur and muscle lunging toward him. He stumbled back, catching his shoulder on the doorframe, and in that split second, Ranger's ferocity did its work. The man cursed under his breath and bolted into the snowstorm, disappearing into the white haze. Luke rose, gun still raised, moving to the doorway to make sure the man was gone. The wind slapped against his face, the snow already swallowing the fleeing figure. He shut and bolted the door. Emily exhaled sharply. That could have been— I know, Luke said. He glanced at Ranger, who was still keyed up, head swinging toward the windows. Good work, boy. The dog's ears stayed high, but his tail gave a single wag before settling again. In the distance, shapes still moved beyond the tree line. 1, 2, maybe more. The storm obscured them, but Luke knew they were there, waiting for an opening. The land around the Parker property was a patchwork of fields and pine groves, with a narrow gravel drive leading back to the main road. The storm had erased most of the tire tracks, making approach and retreat equally difficult. It was a perfect night for a siege. Sarah stepped into the kitchen, her voice low. They're not leaving, are they? No, Luke replied. Not until they get what they came for. Emily's voice wavered. The files. Luke gave a single nod. And me. Across town, Anna Morales sat hunched over her desk at the Gazette office, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The storm outside battered the windows, but her focus was on the laptop screen. She'd pulled up an encrypted messaging app, fingers flying as she coordinated with Mark Ainsley. ETA is sunrise at best, Mark's text read. White out on the highway. We'll move as soon as there's visibility. Anna's reply was terse. They won't last that long if Briggs pushes. Mark's response came with a request. Keep comms open. If you lose them, we go in blind. Anna's jaw tightened. She hated the feeling of waiting while her friend was under siege. Back at the farmhouse, the hours stretched. Luke instructed everyone to stay low, away from windows, and ration the warmth from the fireplace so the smoke wouldn't be visible outside. Ranger paced the kitchen and hallway like a silent sentry, his nails clicking softly on the floorboards. Once, just before midnight, there was the sound of something tapping against the siding 3 slow knocks. Sarah stiffened, her hands tightening around the shotgun. Luke signaled for stillness, moving to peer out the side window. Nothing but snow. The knocks didn't come again. Emily tried to stay calm by keeping her hands busy pouring hot water into mugs, refilling the kettle. At one point, she sat cross-legged on the floor with Ranger beside her, running her fingers through his fur. The steady rhythm of his breathing anchored her. Luke, watching from the counter, could see the weight of the night pressing on everyone. We'll get through this, he said quietly. We just have to hold out until morning. But even as he said it, his eyes kept flicking to the dark windows, calculating every possible way things could go wrong before the first light touched the snow. By the time the clock ticked past 2 a.m., the storm was at its worst, wind screaming through the eaves, snow piling high against the porch. The intruders had retreated deeper into the trees, their outlines now ghostly shapes barely visible through the swirling white. Still, Luke knew they hadn't gone far, and Ranger knew it too. The dog stood at the back door, ears forward, tail low, body still as stone. When Luke stepped beside him, he caught the faintest sound beneath the howl of the wind boots in the snow, circling again. It was going to be a long night. The night bled slowly into the pale blue of dawn, the storm easing into a soft, heavy silence. Snow lay thick across the fields, muffling every sound. Luke hadn't slept, none of them had. He stood by the front window, eyes on the faint light beginning to creep over the horizon. His shoulders ached from tension, but his mind was sharp. This was the dangerous moment when the enemy, after a long night of watching, would decide to act before reinforcements arrived. Ranger sat at his side, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. His fur was dusted with frost, but his gaze was fixed toward the tree line, every muscle taut. From the kitchen, Sarah appeared with a steaming mug of coffee for Luke. The lines of fatigue around her eyes seemed deeper in the morning light. She was tall and slender, with streaks of silver cutting through her chestnut hair. Life had hardened her in quiet ways. Years of running the Parker farm alone after her husband's accident had left her pragmatic, unflappable. But Luke could see worry beneath her composed expression. "They'll try to leave with whatever they came for," she said, voice low. Luke nodded. "And they won't expect the road to be blocked." Emily emerged from the back room, wrapped in a heavy wool coat. She looked exhausted but determined, clutching a thermos of tea. "Anna messaged," she said. "They're 20 minutes out." That was both too soon and not soon enough. At the far edge of the property, movement stirred. 3 figures trudged through the snow toward the narrow access road that wound from the Parker gate to the county highway. Their breath streamed in the cold air, each carrying heavy duffel bags. Luke's pulse kicked up. Even from here, he could make out the broad-shouldered frame of Dalton, his winter coat hanging open, revealing a shoulder holster. The man moved with the casual arrogance of someone used to control. 2 of his men flanked him, smaller but no less dangerous, each scanning the horizon for threats. Luke crouched beside Ranger, placing a gloved hand on the dog's neck. "Not yet," he whispered. The 3 figures reached the gate. Dalton swung it open with a creak, his boots crunching on the frozen gravel. He turned to his men, gesturing toward the road ahead. That's when Luke gave the signal. Ranger burst from the shadows with a sudden, explosive bark that shattered the morning stillness. The German shepherd's charge was a flash of muscle and speed, kicking up plumes of snow as he closed the distance. The men froze, startled by the sudden appearance of the dog blocking their escape route. Ranger planted himself squarely in the narrow lane, teeth bared, ears pinned forward. His growl rolled low and dangerous, echoing off the snowbanks. Dalton took a cautious step back. "Move the dog!" he snapped to one of his men. But the man didn't move. Something about Ranger's stance, the unyielding focus in his eyes, made even seasoned criminals hesitate. In the distance, engines roared. From both ends of the road, vehicles emerged, black SUVs plowing through the snow, headlights cutting through the mist. The lead truck skidded to a halt, and figures in dark tactical gear spilled out, weapons raised. Anna was among them, bundled in a heavy navy parka, her face pale from the cold but alight with grim satisfaction. She strode forward, boots crunching in the snow, eyes locked on Dalton. "Dalton Briggs," she called, her voice ringing across the frozen field. "Drop the bags." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dalton's jaw clenched, his gaze darting toward the tree line as if calculating another route. But with the road blocked by armed federal agents and the gate guarded by a snarling canine, there was nowhere to go. He let the duffel fall to the snow. Inside, the weighty thud of stolen goods and sealed folders confirmed Luke's suspicion. This was what they had risked everything for. Anna stepped closer as 2 agents moved in, cuffing Dalton's wrists behind his back. He met her gaze with a look of pure hatred, but she didn't flinch. "Been a long time coming," she said. Luke joined her, snow crunching under his boots. He handed over a weathered folder, edges creased, corners frayed from inside his jacket. "The rest of what you need," he said. Anna took it carefully, her gloved hands brushing away frost. She opened the flap just enough to glimpse the stamped seals and signed affidavits inside. "This will put him away for good." Ranger trotted up, tail wagging now that the danger had passed. He received a warm scratch behind the ears from Anna before circling back to Luke's side. The air around them seemed lighter. The tension of the night, the fear of being overrun, it all ebbed into the cold morning air, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of survival. The Parker house stood in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney, a sign that warmth still waited inside. Emily stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. Luke gave a small nod to reassure her before turning back to the federal agents. "Let's get these bags inside," he said, "and lock this place down until we're sure it's over." But, in his gut, he knew Dalton's arrest was only part of the story. There were still threads to untangle and enemies who might not be in cuffs yet. For now, though, the Parker family was safe, and that was enough. Snowpine had changed. The long, bitter winter was gone, leaving behind streets lined with fresh blossoms and air scented with thawed earth. The once frozen fields were now a gentle green, and the sound of melting streams replaced the silence of snow. Luke walked up the main street, the medal at his chest catching the sunlight. He wore his dress blues pressed, neat, and still carrying the faint scent of the cedar chest where he kept them. Heads turned as he passed, townsfolk offering warm smiles, firm handshakes, and quiet words of gratitude. It had been months since that morning when Dalton Briggs was taken away in handcuffs. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. Luke's folder of old records saved in a hidden lockbox before his ambush had sealed Dalton's fate. The courtroom had been full the day the verdict was read. Dalton received a lengthy sentence, and the remnants of his criminal network collapsed within weeks. The fear that had once shadowed Snowpine lifted like fog under the morning sun. Anna had been there too, front row in the press gallery. Her blonde hair was pinned back, her blue blazer crisp, but her eyes were alight with the sharp determination that had carried her through years of dangerous reporting. Her investigative series on Dalton's corruption earned her the National Investigative Journalism Award, a framed certificate now hanging in her modest downtown apartment. She had sent Luke a note after the ceremony, short but sincere. "Couldn't have done it without you, or without Ranger." The town square was crowded today. A small stage had been set up under the shade of blooming dogwood trees, and a banner stretched above it read, "Snowpine honors its heroes." Luke took his place near the front, standing beside a podium draped with the town's blue and gold flag. Next to him, Ranger sat tall and proud, a sable and black statue of focus and dignity. His coat gleamed under the spring sun, and his dark eyes swept the crowd with calm awareness. The mayor, a short man with a round, friendly face named Robert Hawthorne, stepped to the microphone. "Today," he began, "we honor courage. We honor those who stood between danger and the innocent, and who faced down the storm with unwavering resolve." His words rolled over the crowd, but Luke only half listened. He was watching Emily, standing just behind the first row. She was in a pale yellow dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. Her cheeks carried the healthy color of someone who'd spent the past weeks in the open air, no longer hiding in fear. When the mayor called Luke's name, the applause was warm and lasting. He accepted a plaque engraved with his name and service record, offering a small nod in thanks. But when the mayor turned to Ranger, the cheers grew louder. "This next award," the mayor said, holding up a polished bronze medal on a thick blue ribbon, "is the Canine Valor Award, presented to those animals whose actions save human lives and inspire us all." He knelt to loop the medal around Ranger's neck. The German shepherd's ears twitched, and he tilted his head as if trying to understand the sudden attention. The crowd laughed softly, charmed by his composure. From her place in the front, Emily stepped forward. She knelt beside Ranger, wrapping her arms around his neck. "If it weren't for you," she said quietly, voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, "we wouldn't be here." Ranger closed his eyes and leaned into her hug, the faint wag of his tail betraying the emotion he didn't otherwise show. After the ceremony, the Parker family gathered with Luke near the steps of the stage. Sarah Parker looked years younger than she had in the winter, the deep worry line smoothed by the safety and stability that had returned to her life. She placed a hand on Luke's arm. "We've been talking," she said. "Ranger belongs with you now, but Emily will be visiting often, so don't think you're rid of us." Luke glanced at Ranger, who seemed to be studying him as if he already understood the arrangement. "I think that's fair," he said with a smile. Emily beamed. "He's family. Just a family that sometimes lives across town." The weeks that followed were quiet. Luke settled into a steadier rhythm, patrolling the edges of town, helping coordinate with state police to keep Dalton's old allies from regaining a foothold. Ranger was never far from his side, shadowing him through every shift, every quiet evening walk, every early morning coffee on the porch. When Emily visited, Ranger's joy was unmissable. He would sprint to meet her the moment she stepped from Sarah's truck, circling her with a soft, excited whine. The bond they'd formed in those dark winter days never faded. It only grew stronger. One mild April afternoon, Luke found himself walking through the Snow Pine Market. Vendors called out cheerful greetings and children darted between stalls. The town felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. An elderly shopkeeper named Mrs. Alden stopped him to press a small bag of fresh-baked rolls into his hands. She was short and stout, with white hair tucked into a floral kerchief, and her eyes sparkled when she looked at Ranger. "You keep him close," she said. "That dog's got the kind of soul you only see once in a lifetime." Luke nodded, glancing down at Ranger. "I know," he said softly. By the time summer's edge began to creep into the air, Luke realized Snow Pine wasn't just a posting anymore. It was home, a place where scars had healed, not just his but the town's. Dalton was gone. His shadows were gone. And in their place stood a community bound together by what they'd endured. Ranger, once just a partner in survival, had become a symbol of loyalty, of courage, of the quiet strength it took to face down fear and protect what mattered. And, as the last of the dogwood petals drifted to the ground, Luke knew that in Snow Pine's story there would always be a chapter marked by the day a dog changed everything. Sometimes, the greatest miracles come not in flashes of lightning or parting seas, but in the quiet loyalty of a friend who refuses to leave your side. Ranger's courage and Luke's faith in doing what is right remind us that God often works through the hands and paws of those around us. In life, we will all face storms, but with trust, perseverance, and a heart open to His guidance, we can find safety, justice, and peace. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more inspiring tales. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His protection be with you always. If you believe in His miracles, comment Amen below.